focusing on the right bottleneck and fixing that is how you move fast in a business. At least that has been my experience over the last 3 years. I've made a lot of mistakes, and the times that I've observed where I've made the most progress are always when I have realized that I have been focusing on the wrong thing. Focusing on the right thing in your business is the type of thing that's going to 10x your growth or not. I've been running a software company for the past 3 years, and it has helped me build a really cool quality of life that I didn't kind of imagine that I'd have beforehand. And I'm only 20 at the minute. And one of the biggest lessons was that of focus and like figuring out the right constraint to work on. And this has been something that I've especially figured out kind of in the past year or so, year and a half. And I really have been applying it better than ever, probably in the last 6 months. And that has made a big difference for me. And so I wanted to make a video on how to figure out what to focus on, or at least my approach to this. Some people have asked me how I think about things in other videos. And I don't see a lot of people talk about software development companies, like service-based companies specifically. So I wanted to share a take on that. The biggest thing is, firstly, you have to think about the goal, and then you have to think about the key pillars of data that you have. So in your business, you have a couple key areas. The way that I break things down, at least, is like you have client acquisition, you have client fulfillment, and then you have team. And if you grow the business, these areas, you can break these down to a much more granular level as you kind of upgrade the business. Now, it doesn't make sense to be thinking like to break things down way further than that for the scale that I'm at. Like I'm a team of 5 people. I don't need to be thinking about like breaking that down into 10 different categories. It just doesn't make sense. So I just have a couple key areas. And then within each of those, I want to be tracking a couple different metrics. And this picture with data then allows me to look across the board and see what is the one thing that is clearly the bottleneck. And it's usually pretty obvious when you start asking yourself this. The first time that I focused on the right bottleneck was when I started to focus on fulfillment. When I started out this company, I very quickly moved to hire contractors and things like that. And I didn't realize I had no idea how to vet people properly. And I hired a bunch of handymen, which did bad jobs basically. And for all kinds of reasons, results were not good. They were not what I wanted. Like clients weren't as happy as I needed them to be. And basically my work was not as good as I wanted it to be. And so when I doubled down on that, that was the first kind of unlock of growth, because you cannot, like, if you put a bunch of marketing and effort to get new clients into a business that does a bad job, you're not going to get very far. And so that was the first part. But then now things have shifted and okay, fulfillment is good, but to keep going and to keep building kind of a bigger business, like acquisition is the next bigger bottleneck, which I'm kind of moving to solve now. And the way that like I have started to break things down is within client acquisition, you have a couple things. So you have like leads, new deals, and impressions, if you will, right? So like complete top of funnel, middle of the funnel, which is like leads, engage people, and then bottom. And then you can basically ask yourself, okay, well, within this, what is the problem? Is it that we get loads of leads and then none of them convert? Because that's a sales issue, rather, compared to, oh, we actually, out of the 5 leads that contact us, we sign 4. So that means your problem is not in the sales. The sale, like improving your sales is not going to grow your business, or not as much as you want. If you go from 5 to 50, that's going to 10x things, right? So in a very concrete example, to be honest, in these 3 areas, the metrics I track are like meetings per week, engaged leads, and then sales, average project value, things like that. In terms of fulfillment, we started tracking like number of deploys per week, and also a little bit of like client satisfaction. That's a little bit of a qualitative one, but like you can ask and reach out to people, ask them to like give you scores on scales and stuff. As you grow, I also think you can add more metrics. But I think to start with, you don't need that many metrics. You can start with just 3 metrics and go from there. But the question that I generally think is most useful to ask to figure out what to focus on is like, where is the biggest bottleneck in the business from start to finish? You kind of go through the entire process and think, how many people get told about me? How many people are interested? How many people do I sell? How many people stick around, right? So like is because sometimes the first constraint that most people have is their service is not as good as they think. And they're actually trying to solve, the top of funnel stuff, but the service is really bad. And so actually clients are just going to churn and leave. And so that's a big one that a lot of people don't see. And so you have to think about like client results. Are they actually happy? That one's a little bit harder to track quantitatively. Like it's not as always obvious to track. Like number of deploys per week does not necessarily mean that's good quality code, right? So one of the things that I try to do is like, could I honestly ask myself 2 questions? Firstly, would my clients shout my name from the rooftops if they could? And secondly, could I sleep easy at night knowing if I could do no new marketing, I can't tell anybody else about my stuff? will all of my clients stick with me forever as long as they have money? If I cannot answer yes to both of those questions, then I have to double down on the client stuff. And, that's not a linear answer. Stuff goes wrong sometimes, like that's okay. But you have to work, in general, I try and work with those guiding questions, right? Like, how do I make it so that I really think that my clients are super proud of having hired us and like we're one of the best agencies they've ever hired? That is what I want to move toward. It does not always work out and you cannot be perfect from the start, but you have to aim to improve on every single deal. And I think that's one thing that I'm proud of having done, at least, is like every single deal has been like, in terms of the work has always been better than the last project. And I want to keep improving things. And I want to aim toward saying yes to both of those questions as confidently as I possibly can. And I think some people, like, if you try and set aside your ego and really, really question yourself, like, is this really something that people would go out and shout to the world that we did an amazing job for them? If the answer is no, then you have to work on that stuff first. And usually, like, clients will tell you when they're really happy. And you should try and produce as much of that as possible. So those are the kinds of, I guess they're not really metrics, but they're guiding questions for the client results side of things. And then on the team side, it's like, can I trust my team, basically? And there's plenty of metrics which you can start to track. I don't track that many in this area because I also think right now a qualitative approach is enough for me. Like, just for my scale, I don't need crazy numbers. One of the things I do is I send weekly reviews where the team reports on their level of productivity, like self-reported productivity and self-reported satisfaction. And I do maintain an eye on both of these indicators. And it has actually saved, like, there was one time I saw satisfaction rating drop from one particular team member and I had a chat. There was a problem and it was to do with some other stuff, and we understood, and I proposed a solution, and it went really, really great, and he was really happy afterward. And that was a really good example of like these weekly surveys saving me a lot of pain, because I was aware of that problem very, very quickly because I saw things, and also I observed even in the calls. Like I have a lot of surface area with my team. Like I contact, I'm in touch with them all the time, and I can't speak to the experience of like managing multiple layers of leadership and stuff like that, but at least for the scale that I'm at, and I would think this can apply to the 10 to 20 people range, up to the 10 to 20 people kind of like range of companies. You can track some of these like self-reported numbers and self-reported satisfaction, productivity numbers, things like that. And then the other thing is like, can I trust my team to get something done if I'm not there? Like, I think that's a really good guiding question to ask yourself if that's the case. In general, I think like the solving the right constraint can get you really far, but to identify the right constraint is the most important question, because that identifies where your work goes and stuff like that. Remind yourself constantly about what you are trying to focus on. The way that I do this is I have goals that I set for the year or quarter or whatever it is. On a weekly basis, I go back to those goals. I look at them. I write, am I on track? Am I not? If I'm not, why? What is the constraint? What does the data point to? And I do this on a weekly basis. And so many weeks, the goal is the same, the constraint's the same, the actions are the same. It has not changed. On a week-to-week basis, it has not changed, but that regardless of that, I will still go back and I will fill out this like weekly Notion tracker, whatever that I made for myself. And the act of repetition in and of itself gets you to focus on the right thing. And I think that's something that has brought a lot of value, which I underestimated before. I thought, like it's, if you set a goal, but if you don't constantly go back to it, then you will forget it. Like, it's pretty human, unless you have one singular goal. But in general, I think even when you just have one goal, like, you have to constantly consider, how are my actions ultimately contributing and building back to this thing? What are the primary actions that I need to take based on the data that indicate I will move closer to my goal? If you're starting from really, really little, the first constraint that you should solve is distribution and volume, or just like a little bit. Like, you have to start with a couple leads and things like that. And then the next constraint is immediately quality. Like, I would say if you're starting from complete zero, the constraints are generally pretty simple. It's like, first you need a little bit of distribution. You need somebody who's be willing to talk to you, basically. And you can work for free to do that if you really need. Like, people will take up, if you don't know anybody, offer to work for free, you'll get somebody in the pipeline and then do a really good job. And I think most of the time, at least in like early business stages, your constraint will usually oscillate between quality and like funnel. So client acquisition. So it's like, you have to first get a couple clients, try and do good work for them. Then once that goes really well, As you start to improve that, then you have to flip back to like acquisition and grow that, right? But then if you grow acquisition too much, at some point service, like fulfillment does fall apart. And so then you need to switch back, focus on that, then grow acquisition again. At least I think, at least in these early stages, you oscillate a lot between those two. As you grow, I think then the team component becomes more relevant. I would say my own theory rather than practice, but I think as you grow, then the team would start to separate into like team fulfillment, satisfaction, things like that, and then team acquisition, right? So like, do you have a talent pipeline problem and stuff like that? But the thing is, you grow, the question of focusing on the right thing is just a question of like adding more data streams to your, I call it a scoreboard or a scorecard or whatever. And that's the thing that I keep on a weekly basis. Actually, I can go through it right now and I will have like various metrics that I've been tracking. So I will also pick metrics to track based on the goals. I won't track every single thing all the time because I don't have the bandwidth to do that. So right now, the main metrics that I tracked for this month were new leads, meetings booked, and number of posts. Posts being company social media posts. There are some evergreen metrics which I think are always relevant. Revenue per employee, cash collected, deal size, and new deals. And those are just 7 metrics that I was looking at. But I have a lot more, which things like, okay, meetings completed, closed deals percentage, customer wins collected, average response time, net promoter score, team wins collected, production deploys shipped, new demos shipped. So that's a longer list of metrics that I have like in my arsenal. And sometimes I track them more closely, sometimes less closely, depending on what the constraint is. So as I mentioned earlier, like right now, the constraint that I'm focused on is upgrading like the acquisition side of things. And so the North Star metrics that I'm working toward right now are the new leads, meetings booked, and social media posts. Those 3, like I will avoid focusing on more than 1 to 3 metrics at a time, because if you focus on 10, that is not focused, that is not a priority, that is just trying to do everything at once. And that is not like, I think that violates that principle of focus that the past 3 years have taught me. So in my experience, it works better to just focus on one constraint at a time. This is a challenge in a small business, especially because a lot of the time you also have day-to-day things to wrap. So like I wasn't able to do much today on that like most important stuff because I was replying to things, I was taking care of this project, that project, and things get in the way. And you can't like drop the ball on things. And that is one of the challenges of being a small business. And yeah, I mean, it's just part of the game, I guess. Anyway, those are my thoughts on how to focus. For the person who asked and commented in the other video about what to focus on, this would be my response to you. If you have watched this and you have any other questions about how I focus or think about things or are curious about anything else about my business or me, let me know in comments. I answer to basically all of those, and I make videos about ones that I think could be useful to more people like this one. So I do read all of those, but yeah. So drop any comments if you have questions or thoughts. That's my approach to like figuring out what to focus on, and I hope it's helpful for anybody who's trying to build a business themselves.